Hello, today we're embarking on a new Indian trilogy to explore the history of France in India. And yes, did you know that France, although briefly, was actually the dominant European power in the Indian subcontinent before being outmaneuvered by the British? But why was France interested in India? What allowed France to gain the upper hand in the region for a few years? And what happened for Great Britain to end up dominating this territory, which was already one of the most populated in the world at the time? Thank you for your many questions and enthusiasm about this topic. I was delighted to see your interest in the subject. Of course, you will get an answer to each of them, whether during the trilogy or individually in the final part, for the questions I may not have answered yet. The Indian history of France truly begins on August 27, 1664, with the creation of the Royal East India Company. But before we get into that, as usual, let's start with a bit of context to understand why France, a European country far from what was called the Indies, became interested in the subcontinent. It's crucial to know that other European nations developed an interest in the subcontinent well before France. This was especially true for Portugal, the United Provinces, now the Netherlands, Denmark, and Great Britain. The Portuguese were the first to settle after the discovery of a new sea route that allowed direct access to India by sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, which is now in South Africa. They arrived in India in the early 16th century, combining trade, colonization, and religious missions in their controlled territories. From the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the Dutch and British, in a pragmatic manner, seeing the commercial successes of the Portuguese, they also became interested in the subcontinent and founded major trading companies, namely the Dutch East India Company and the East India Company. Each had commercial charters for the territory. To make all this clearer, a commercial charter basically gives private companies extensive rights and a monopoly over a territory regarding trade, exploration, and occupation of that territory. This autonomy sometimes extends to local diplomatic affairs. In 1620, the Danes established a company in Chartres for trade with the Indies, a company that won't really last because it was poorly organized, even more poorly funded, and received very little support from the mother country. Despite attempts by entrepreneurs from the early 1600s and efforts under Richelieu, the French only established a company in 1664 during the second half of the 17th century, driven by Colbert, Louis XIV's minister. That's the context, but why was France interested in Le Juste? Well, quite simply because France, too, wanted to be able to benefit from trade with the Indies, who, for example, at the time, made the United Provinces rich, experiencing their golden age, or Gouden Eeuw in Dutch, thanks in part to their commercial successes. Colbert's logic is straightforward. A strong economy will enable France to thrive and achieve its goals, particularly military ambitions. He says this: "It is to the greatness of a state that its people devote themselves to military exercises. Its utility remains unaffected by its commercial activities." With this in mind, he founded the Royal East India Company in 1664, aiming to establish a prosperous and French commercial activity in the Indies. He was inspired by the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, or Dutch East India Company, which is the Dutch East India Company, and sought to imitate its structure. While the Dutch East India Company is a state-supervised commercial enterprise, the French East India Company is merely a state-run enterprise, with the king as its main shareholder, followed by many institutional investors, but structured on the commercial model of the Dutch East India Company. Unsurprisingly, this in-between situation, and the fact that some shareholders had simply been forced to buy shares, arouses the merchants' distrust. Yet they are essential to the success of this commercial project. So it's a poorly structured company managed directly by the administration and responding to poorly defined political and economic objectives, which will constantly get in each other's way. By the way, who is coming into being so it doesn't start on solid structural foundations to compete with the better designed and well-established mechanisms of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company? But anyway, in 1666, France sends a royal embassy to Delhi, capital of the powerful Mughal Empire, to establish diplomatic relations, with the aim of obtaining authorization to launch the company's activities. The Mughal Empire, a Persianized Islamic empire that heavily influenced and controlled northern India, may be unfamiliar to those not well versed in Indian history, and just a few years later in 1700 it reached its peak, taking control of almost the entire Indian subcontinent, despite many internal troubles. In 1668, the French secured the Mughal Emperor's agreement. The company established itself in India by creating its first trading post in the major commercial port of Surat, located on India's northern coast, where nearly all other European powers were also present, as shown on the screen. For accuracy, a trading post is basically a place, usually a building or a group of buildings, that centralizes the commercial affairs of the company to which it belongs. The term is outdated but still appears in many historical works and period documents. A term that's more commonly used nowadays because it covers a wider range of realities, including trading posts and commercial ports, is trading station. That's the term I'll use from now on, unless I want to be more specific about what I'm talking about. Surat will be the starting point for the creation of many French trading stations in India. More or less short-lived, as you can see on the map displayed on the screen, which I created based on the work of Marie Menard Jacob, whose reference you can find in the description. It's also important to understand that the situation for the French is not easy. They arrive in a territory they don't know at all, where two rival powers, the Dutch and the British, are not only well established, but above all, do not look favorably on their arrival. They will try to thwart their efforts through various means. Despite numerous challenges, the company establishes itself, gains experience, and learns from its mistakes. This is thanks to François Martin, who settled the French in Pondicherry in 1673, a trading post that would later become very important. On the metropolitan side, it was Lorient that was chosen at the time to become the metropolitan port of the French East India Company. The company was also entangled in Louis XIV's numerous wars, which frequently set France against other European powers in the region. The British East India Company was also involved in the numerous internal conflicts of the Indian subcontinent, often not by choice. If you have watched the various mini-documentaries about Indian history. To illustrate, the Dutch occupied Pondicherry from 1693 to 1698, that is 5 years, during the War of the League of Augsburg. In 1703, the Marathas, a Hindu people from central India, established an independent kingdom at the Mughal Empire's expense. They pillaged Hatay, the center of French-Indian trade, halting commerce for months. All this greatly harmed a French company that was poorly established, structured, and supported, which, moreover, did not yet fully grasp local politics. Consequently, the company fell into debt, and despite multiple turnaround efforts, by 1706, it was close to liquidation. Despite these difficulties that served as a lesson to the institutions, French ambitions persisted. And while the company collapsed in the homeland, the French present in India did not give up and had gained experience. They sustained French India by bolstering trading posts and persisting with available resources. For instance, in Pondicherry, a European-style fort was built in 1706, enabling the French to set up a trading post, the new French trade center in the region, replacing Surat. It's actually quite interesting to see the contrast between the company's situation in the homeland, which is catastrophic, and its situation in India, where at the beginning of the 18th century, it actually had a rather solid base, thanks to the work of the French, who learned and worked on site as best they could despite the difficulties. Starting from 1707, the state restructured the company to deal with its near bankruptcy, and the company will, in a way, outsource its activities and rights to private companies, mainly merchants, Malouins, meaning they are from the port of Saint-Malo, and the well-known financier Antoine Crozat. Historian André L'Espagnol states that these efforts effectively and gradually revitalized the company. Things change again in 1719 when the Company of the Indies is integrated into the grand project of the new Minister of Finance of a Kingdom of France in full regency, John Law, a Scotsman from Horston. This new company basically brings together the different French companies, whether Western, Eastern, or African, and is called the Perpetual Company of the Indies. This centralizing project is integrated into the general reasoning of gold, sometimes called the gold system. Despite being objectively interesting and inspired by contemporary developments in the United Provinces and United Kingdom, it will ultimately fail. What caused its collapse? Well, to put it very simply and stay on our topic, the gold system into which the company was integrated relies on various speculative parameters while trying to introduce fiat money that is basically an object whose face value is higher than its real value. This is the case with our current banknotes, which once took the form of paper money. So it was a way of organizing economic activity that relied on trust in a central system on the one hand, and on speculative elements on the other hand. The 2 points are both strengths and weaknesses, as they greatly encourage trade, before violently collapsing the following year in 1720 as a victim of a speculative panic. The collapse of the gold system brought down the Perpetual Company of the Indies with it. Gold ruined? The country and government then faced a crisis. Despite the challenges, they succeeded. And 3 years later, the Royal Company of the East Indies was established, focusing on French activities in the Indian Ocean. Subsequently, starting from 1725, and for a period of about 20 years, the Royal Company of the Indies finally did well. Leveraging improved commercial management in peacetime, profits soared and trading posts flourished. The French company's commercial growth, which inevitably harms its competitors, is causing increasingly significant frictions with the Dutch and the British, who sometimes work together to counter the new French commercial successes. The various forces present watch each other in a growing atmosphere of tension. According to Philippe Audrey, over 50% of Europeans stationed in India passed away within a year of their arrival, providing insight into the harsh realities they faced. An incredibly high rate, mainly caused by disease and the harsh climate for bodies that are not used to it. Consequently, up to a third of the garrisons were consistently ill in medical centers that were too small for Indian conditions. Those who survived their time in India typically returned to the mainland after a few years of service. According to Marie Menard Jacob, most French soldiers sent to India during this period were unaware that they would be stationed there before leaving. The recruiters, lacking volunteers, especially because of the many wars of Louis XIV, take whoever they can and are deliberately vague. As a result, it seems that most of the recruits think they're making a round trip and serving as an escort for the company's convoy, before finding themselves in India for several years. So it's easy to imagine that with all this, combined with the boredom that plagues many employees and soldiers between the arrival of each ship. For instance, officers can't control the serious issues caused by alcohol abuse. The daily atmosphere must not always have been cheerful, far from the somewhat romantic image we might have of it. Despite that, as mentioned earlier, the company is going through a good period. The Cherries Bridge fortifications, a safe haven for the French in India, are solid. The garrison consists of Europeans and locals. The sepoys, Indian soldiers trained and equipped in the French manner, performed the task. Evidence of this is the French involvement in a 1740 Indian conflict between the Marathas and a local Muslim ruler. The family of the latter, defeated, comes to take refuge in Pondicherry. From then on, the French welcomed the Marathas, then resisted them, causing the Marathas to eventually give up the siege. Upon seeing the city and garrison's preparation, I share the details of this event, which includes a very French anecdote, on my Facebook page. The post link is in the description. This stance allows the French to extend their influence and officially, for the first time for Europeans in India, to have the title of Mansadbar, which is a Mughal title, originally military, but which is equivalent to the title of a vassal of the Mughal emperor. So it is the governor of Pondicherry and his successors who receive this title, along with new territories around Pondicherry, given as a token of gratitude. This political legitimacy marks the beginning of the true rise of French power in India. And that's what we'll cover in the next episode. Until then, I'm counting on you to give this video a thumbs up so that our dear YouTube platform hears about it. Let me know your thoughts on this first part in the comments. With that, I'll see you very soon.